You're listening to Doctor Who, The Nightmare Engineers. For a while, the only movement in the open yard was of the gentle fog that wafted its way across the neatly trimmed grass and the many stone fixtures. Unit Staff Sergeant Harold Spencer was accustomed to the minimal movement within the fenced area. It was hardly likely that there would be much stirring, given the location he patrolled. But it was both his duty and his respect for his fellow troops that led him to volunteer for the post. They had watched over him in life, and so he would return the favour when they passed on. He was shortly joined by another man, and though at first he could only see the silhouette of the individual, his outline was unique and instantly recognisable. The frilled cuffs, shock of hair, and draped coat betrayed the Doctor. The old Time Lord swung the gate to the unit graveyard open. It was his own respect that had prompted the Doctor to visit Unit's burial ground. Separated, not just from society, but from the main Unit HQ facility, it had been agreed that a special cemetery need be created to ensure that the otherworldly deaths that Unit's special forces experienced would not be unintentionally discovered by the regular public. Web fluid, the Silurian virus, Stahlmann's ooze, all potentially deadly if unearthed. And a few days ago, the Doctor had been privy to yet another deadly force, himself. Trying to force the images of recent events out of his mind, he turned to face the first of several tombstones he had come to see. The sight before him was worse even than the picture in his mind. Etched into the stone arch were several words, but only two caught the Doctor's attention. Josephine Grant, the young girl that he'd come to grow rather fond of, despite her clumsiness and lack of a scientific mind. It had only been a year since he'd met her, when she'd first attacked his dematerialization circuit with a fire extinguisher. Ham-fisted, he'd called her. Such an insult paled in comparison to his recent actions. How careless he'd been. The words choked in his mouth as he spoke, laying a small collection of daffodils down next to the stone.
I'm so sorry, Josephine. I let you down.
The Doctor turned away before his emotions overcame him, producing a stoic look on his face, and moved over to his next port of call. A grander memorial than the one granted to Joe, but the name on it revealed it worthy of such treatment. Brigadier Alastair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart was embossed into the grey stone. Listed underneath were the Brigadier's multiple military achievements, along with recognition of service to country from both the Prime Minister and the Queen. Alastair had certainly impacted on the lives of many. As with so many of his fellow troops buried around him, the Brigadier was one of the world's unsung heroes. As with Joe, the Doctor laid down a collection of flowers, and found himself compelled to continue his conversation with his deceased friends.
And you, Alastair, you gave me a home, the finest of friendships.
Carrying on, the Doctor looked around, observing all the names surrounding him. Benton, Yates, Bell, Osgood, so many others he'd come to know. Reinstating his sentiment to the Brigadier as before, he spoke to them.
The finest of friendships. Of families. How I've repaid you all.
The Staff Sergeant saw the Doctor's patrol and moved over to him. Being on post didn't just mean patrolling the grassy lot. He came up next to the Doctor speaking calmly to him.
You can't blame yourself, Doctor. You weren't to know what would happen. That's awfully kind of you, Sergeant, but it's difficult for me to pin the blame on someone else, when it was the TARDIS that caused that explosion. That explosion that you yourself said was completely unexpected, that couldn't have been predicted. I suppose so.
What do you, expect you'll do now? The Doctor paused, considering his response, but it was a question he had asked himself, and had produced an answer for.
Tender my resignation, I should expect. I've only been on Earth for a few years, and I've already done more harm than good.
I suppose if that's what you've decided, then it's for the best. Can't say I agree. But you've always been smarter than us, Doctor. Anything you've thought about has got to be a good idea.
Are you all right, Sergeant?
As he was overcome by a coughing fit, the Doctor could see that the Staff Sergeant was far from fine. Harold Spencer dropped to his knees, his face red from the effort on his lungs. The Doctor tried to help him, but Spencer was soon unconscious. As he was examining the Sergeant for a possible cause to the fit he had witnessed, the Doctor began to notice something peculiar about the fog around him. It no longer had the slight chill to it caused by the vapour coming into contact with his skin, nor could he smell the slight hint of mildew created by damp grass. Instead, the air around him possessed a slight metallic tang. Risking a taste, the Doctor stuck out his tongue, instantly recognizing mercury vapour. Knowing the damage it could do to his brain and lungs if he inhaled any more, his hand shot for his cravat, holding it up to his face as a makeshift filter. It wouldn't hold for long, but if it could get him back to a building... The Doctor began to run towards Main Unit HQ. Seeing the smoke around him, he wished that for once the Brigadier had ignored protocol and stationed the graveyard closer to the HQ. Continuing to run, he began to spot the bodies of other unit personnel on the path. If the mercury vapour had already reached them, then he was wasting his time trying to help. Seeing the main building in the distance gave the Doctor a surge of hope, but his spirits were quickly diminished. The silk of his cravat wasn't intended as a gas filter, and the vapour had started to reach his lungs too. His respiratory bypass system had prolonged his resistance to the mercury, but he'd not reached the edge of the plane that the unit HQ resided on before he too was on his knees. His throat burning from the mercury stinging his esophagus, the Doctor struggled to stay upright, eventually collapsing in a morbid parallel to Spencer only minutes before. He managed to look upwards for a second, spying the silhouette of a large spaceship descending.
An invasion,
he thought to himself, and he was powerless to stop it. As his vision slowly darkened and he slipped into unconsciousness, the Doctor's head filled with voices. He didn't recognize them, but they slowly faded away as... Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart and Joe Grant watched with relief as the Doctor jumped into life, coughing as he awoke from what they had assumed to be an exceptionally bad dream. As the Doctor's eyes opened, slowly coming into focus, he jumped up and hugged Joe tightly.
Miss Grant? Lethbridge Stewart, you're alive?
Of course we are, Doctor. What on earth would make you think otherwise?
Joe fed the Doctor a mug of tea as he recounted his nightmare.
I'm sorry I appear so shaken. It's just... well, it was all so surreal. So horrible. Like a world of my worst fears.
And you said you heard voices as you died in your dream?
Yes. I didn't recognize them, but they were all speaking to me. Telling me a name.
The Doctor took a sip from his tea, then spoke at last.
Emil Keller.
You have been listening to Doctor Who, The Nightmare Engineers, narrated by Jack Coghlan. Sound design and editing, Jack Coghlan. Theme tune, Maureen Dalek. Theme arrangement, Ron Granier. Cover art, Jack Coghlan. The Keller Machine was created by Don Houghton. Written and produced by Jack Coghlan.
I hope you enjoyed that. Anyway, always remember, children, splink whenever you go to cross the road, and that if you start with a war and end with a Zul, then you'll always have fun. So, bye-bye and cheerio.